Well, welcome to Back to Basics, a new IDPE podcast in association with Schools Management Plus. I am Simon Lerwill, the Director of Development at Marlborough College and Chair of IDPE. Each week, we're going to hear from an experienced development leader who is part of IDPE's New to Development programme and an expert in a particular area of fundraising and engagement. And I'm delighted to be joined for our next podcast by Louise Bennett, CEO of IDPE. Hello, Lou.
Hello. I'm a little bit worried about being called an expert.
I'm a bit worried this is going to be an IDP loving, but it's not. It's going to be today. You're going to be sharing your experience and expertise on compliance and legislation. So strap yourselves in. But before we get on to that, we start each podcast with an icebreaker, which is what's the fundraising or engagement idea that you wish you'd thought of and why?
So I've had to think about this, and I think the thing that I've enjoyed, or one of the things I've enjoyed doing the most, is when I was at the Stroke Association, we did jail and bail, which is where you get the police involved.
Jail and bail.
Yes, jail and bail. You get the police involved and locally, and they go around and arrest people who know that they're being arrested, but often the people around them don't know they're being arrested, as I say, pretend arrest, I should say. And then they go to a place and they have to ring round and actually raise their bail money to be released. So it's lots of fun. It's really visual,
Wow.
really great. And when I did it at Stroke Association, we had people who on the radio, so they were being arrested live on radio and that kind of thing. And it's just, yeah, lots of fun and a great way of obviously fundraising as well. So yeah, wish I'd thought of that, but yeah, it's good.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
Um,
not quite
uh,
sure how it would go down in the school sector.
no,
Start arresting teachers.
I'm not sure, but hey, very innovative.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I've not come across that before. Now, you've been at IDP for 8 years and you were in the charity sector before that. And you just mentioned the Stroke Association. So what do you think are the differences you found between working in the charity sector and now in the school sector?
So I think in terms of the principle kind of theory and the principles behind fundraising, it's very similar. But I think and people will have heard me say this before, what I love about about the school sector, sorry, is the kind of sharing that happens within the school sector,
Mm.
that you don't get that, it's much more competitive within the charitable sector. So there isn't that opportunity to sort of share ideas and talk through perhaps in quite so much detail what you're doing because you're worried about the charity down the road pinching your idea. Whereas here, there's so much support for each other and sharing that sort of experience, expertise, resources. It just makes such a difference, I think, to the community really, and being able to kind of support each other in that way to drive forward fundraising. It's wonderful. It's a real privilege to be part of.
Yeah, I do think actually, and we're in danger of going down the IDP
Yeah.
love route. But I do agree that sharing kind of openness support does create a very unique community within schools fundraising, which is very special.
Yeah. Let's move on to now compliance and legislation.
Talking of special, let's move on to the main theme, which is compliance and legislation. And before people switch off, this is an important topic, as we're going to find out. Development officers have to deal with lots of compliance and legislation from the Fundraising Regulator Code of Practice, GDPR, consent, PECA, due diligence on major donations, and now, of course, VAT. So lots of acronyms in there. So first question, Lou, why is compliance and legislation important?
I think, first of all, it's a necessity. We have to do it. We have to comply with fundraising law. We have to comply with data protection law. And now with the sort of with VAT implications as well. But I think it's more than that. It's also about duty of care to our community, to our donors. And I think by following sort of compliance and following sort of fundraising legislation and for example, data protection legislation, we can minimise the risk to our community, but also to the institution as well. So there's that reputational risk that you're managing by doing your due diligence, by managing that risk to ensure that you're protecting your community, protecting your donors, and protecting the school. We've seen, through there's lots of examples, as you say, of things coming in. When I started at IDPE, the whole sort of changes around data protection happened, and we quickly had to kind of adapt our fundraising models in schools to respond to that. Now we're having to do that with that. But I think it's really necessary as a school to work together, and then from a point of view of development professionals to kind of recognise where development is impacted by these different legislative changes, or and ensure that you're doing your due diligence and managing risk around that.
I can never say due diligence either. And I guess it's important that this is a school-wide concern, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's important for development officers to know what it means for them, but of course, compliance and regulation legislation is a school community.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that the board of governors has an understanding of, or board of trustees has an understanding of their responsibility around due diligence and data protection, fundraising. Particularly, I think I draw attention to kind of their responsibility around not only what is being raised, but how it's being raised. And there is guidance on the Charity Commission website around for specifically for governors to ensure that they have that. They understand their responsibility to ensure fundraising is done well within the school.
Of course. So what do you think the sector's doing well in this area, and where could it be improved?
Okay, so I think in terms of data protection, I think actually as a sector, we've really sort of kind of stood up and kind of changed the processes that we had pre sort of GDPR, pre the data protection bill coming in. And really, I think we're much more transparent now in terms of our privacy notices around what we're doing in terms of fundraising. I think there's a much better understanding of the legal basis we can use to sort of fundraise. So from legitimate interest and consent, and the differences, for example, as you said, the acronyms earlier, GDPR and PECA, and how those work. I think the areas that we probably get questioned a lot about, and I would say the areas that actually maybe more work needs to be done, is around that due diligence piece on major donors. I think we've seen in the charitable sector a number of charities being sort of picked up on this and how they perhaps haven't done their due diligence. And I think that's an area that we need to be ensuring that we're minimising the risk on, and ensuring that we're actually looking at the donors that are giving and carrying out those checks to ensure that we are managing their funds appropriately, and the school's reputation as well. So yes, I think that's an area we could do a bit more on.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work on that at Marlborough in terms of the due diligence process. It's a bit like you. I do wonder in the future that can almost be, there's a danger that could be the next thing, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean. So I
yeah.
think it's really important that schools have a process and a policy and have thought it all through. Um, some people will think that compliance and legislation, is just a barrier to enabling them to raise funds, just a problem, that's in the way. So what do you say to that?
I think it's about protecting your school and protecting your community, and therefore, the more you familiarise yourselves with the compliance, the sort of legislation and compliance, be that fundraising, be it data protection, be it VAT now coming in, I think that we can do a better job. So I think it's about ensuring that we know what the rules are, and then working within those rules and minimising the risk to both, as I say, the institution and donors. So I think it feels sometimes like a barrier because it's another thing to do on that to-do list, but without doing it. But I think once we do it and we familiarise ourselves and we ensure that the processes are in place, we can then guarantee and prevent further problems happening, perhaps where they could occur if sort of data breaches, for example, happen, or there's a shift in terms of there's a problem with the due diligence process. If it's all in place, there's your sort of minimising your risk and minimising that reputational damage as well. So, and as I say, protecting your community.
Actually, a point you just kind of hinted at there, protecting your time, because of course, if you don't have these things in place properly, and then you do have a GDPR, error, or you accept a donation you shouldn't have done, actually, the time then and pain is much greater than
Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
that you put into the
Yeah,
process of policy in the
yeah,
first place.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And then thinking about the charity sector more widely, obviously that's where you've come from. What do you think kind of IDP's role, the role of schools, is in terms of complying with legislation? As a sector, what difference do you think we're trying to make?
Well, I think from an IDP's perspective, and as a community too, we're trying to build best practice around compliance and legislation. We want people to be doing the best they can be doing and ensuring they're, as I say, protecting both their schools and their donors. But I think also it's about us building trust in giving more widely. We've seen that, as I say, we've talked about some of the challenges that we've had in the past around, for example, due diligence in the charitable sector, or before that, the data protection stuff that happened, and before that, it was obviously the code of the fundraising regulator being set up. So I think it's really important that as schools, we're part of the wider fundraising sector in terms of that protecting vulnerable donors, considering how we build trust in giving, so that we get the community giving more widely, or communities giving more widely to charity, schools and beyond.
Yeah, because all the boats rise in the tide, or whatever the analogy is.
Absolutely.
If all donors are more trusting of charities and schools, we're all going to benefit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, final question. What's that one piece of advice you wish you'd been given when you started?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. I think it's about prioritization, and maybe not trying to do too much all at one go. So I think, and I'm sure that's probably something many fundraisers are guilty of. We're sort of ambitious and we want to say yes to everything. And I think back to a time actually when I was at Stroke Association, I decided to do a skip for stroke. And with schools, and I wrote out to all the schools across the whole of Wales, and suddenly schools from, I was based in Cardiff, suddenly schools in North Wales and West Wales are all saying, yes, we'll do it, but can you come and see us and do a talk on Stroke Association? And, I'm running all over the country trying to get schools to do that. And I think in hindsight, it would have been really great to have started that in Cardiff, where I was based, and kind of maybe prioritise building those relationships locally. And I think that's the kind of learning I've taken away over the last few years, is thinking, or over the years of working in the charitable sector and now in IDP as well, I think is about thinking what's realistic and what can I achieve, and prioritising around that. So it sort of stops that kind of overwhelm piece, but it also means that you're much more effective as a fundraiser, and hopefully raising more. So yes, that'd be my learning. Perhaps don't run across Wales or wherever you are to try and achieve fundraising success.
I think that's really important. And I think actually for fundraisers, it's particularly important, because I think fundraisers tend to be wired as people pleasers, people who want to make a difference, people who want to follow every route to see if that gift might come off, and therefore probably really bad at saying no.
Yeah.
And I'd refer listeners to the podcast with Catherine on strategy, and how strategy, a very clear strategy and a focused strategy, can be helpful as a tool in helping you say no. Because if it's not in your going to help your strategy, why are you doing it?
Yeah, and there's also a useful phrase of "no, not yet" as well, which I do.
Yet.
Yeah, so it's sort of going back to, as you say, referring to the strategy and saying, well, the strategy currently focuses on this, but maybe in the future. So it's that kind of positive way of saying no, which I think as fundraisers we all could learn. So yeah.
Or no, but if we did this, is the other one. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you for sharing all your time and expertise today, and I hope that everyone else thought that compliance legislation was more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
So too.
And so important. So it's such an important subject, and thanks for all you do on that. And a reminder, you can hear more about Lou talking about legislation compliance as part of IDP's new development programme, which launches next month in November. Provides an introduction to all the fundamentals of schools fundraising and engagement. So whether you're new to the sector or in the process of setting up an office, head to the IDP website to find out more. Actually, just before we close, I presume IDP website also a good place for templates on various compliance and legislation items, Lou?
Absolutely. Go to the resource library. There's examples from across the school, back to that piece about sharing across the school community, from sort of due diligence policies to fundraising policies and everything else. So yeah, please do go and take a look.
See, I couldn't help but get that final IDP plug in. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.